the intensity and the hyperfocus that can allow an athlete to really develop high-level skill because they can get so intense and passionate and focused and driven at learning specific skills. It's by sport, right? So archery has their own banned substances. Cycling has its own banned substances. Soccer has its own banned substances. And some of it is because what's performance enhancing for archery does nothing for an athlete who's a cyclist, and vice versa. Something that helps a cyclist could be really horrible for an archer, and it's really that idea that at a young age, you learn to manage adversity. And so facing adversity later on is familiar. So often we're trying to protect our children from adversity. And so they're not growing up facing hard situations. And kids with learning disabilities learn to navigate adversity at a young age, right? Whether it's ADHD or dyslexia or, speech challenge, like this idea that I have to learn to be different in the world and figure out how to cope and adapt to that, I think is very powerful.
Welcome back to the Zarlengo Foundation Unlocking Learning Disabilities Podcast. Today we are joined by Kate Bennett at Athlete Insight. Mm-hmm. And so Kate, tell me, what kind of patients do you normally see in your practice?
Yeah, so I work primarily with athletes who are high school, college, or elite level athletes. So going to race internationally, competing at the Olympics, the Paralympics. But then I also have a smattering of athletes who are 10, 11, 12 years old who just want to be more confident and resilient in their sport, all the way up to athletes who are in their 60s, also just wanting to perform at their highest level and have more fun.
Yeah, so tell me, I want to talk today about learning disabilities and athletics. And so is there a connection between, high-level athletes or athletics in general and learning disabilities? Is there any kind of connection that you've seen over the years?
I can speak anecdotally. It's really interesting. Before you even contacted me, I had an intern who did some research for me. There's not a lot of research out there that researches or explores the prevalence rates. We're starting to see some of what are the prevalence rates of athletes with ADHD? I would say dyslexia sorts of stuff that's less on the radar these days. But I can say anecdotally within my own practice, yes, absolutely. I have a lot of high-level college and elite professional athletes who definitely have ADHD and some LD learning disability stuff going on. I don't think have the research at this point to really track it that way.
Sure. So can you tell me, okay, so ADHD is one. We've interviewed several people with ADHD. How can ADHD or dyslexia affect someone's ability to do athletics? Does it help? Does it hurt? Do they hyperfocus? Do you have any kind of ideas on that?
Yeah. So if we're thinking about ADHD in particular, and there's more research on that, so I think we can speak to that more scientifically. But certainly the intensity and the hyperfocus that can allow an athlete to really develop high-level skill because they can get so intense and passionate and focused and driven at learning specific skills. So whether that is being a soccer player and you spend hours upon hours in the yard juggling, or maybe you're a triathlete and you have the energy to be able to go for long rides and runs and swims. And so that high level of hyperactivity can also serve athletes as well. I also think there's a lot of creativity and passion within that, right? And we know that creativity can be a really valuable asset when it comes to athletics. Whether that is, being able to create a play on the field, in soccer or lacrosse or on the ice in hockey. But also if you think about some more of the alternative sports like skateboarding and BMX and skiing, we've got these new events that allow athletes to express themselves creatively, which I also think when we think about how learning disabilities allow athletes and individuals just to tap into who am I really and how do I utilize my assets and my strengths in ways that feel meaningful to me. Sure. I think creativity is a big one. Dyslexia, learning to decode, right? You have to develop that alternative perspective of how do I solve this problem? Because it doesn't look the same for me as it does for everybody else in this world. And I think when you think about athletics and being able to navigate something that you hadn't planned for or having to respond spontaneously to something that's happening right in front of you, that ability to shift and create a new perspective and solve the problem on the fly is incredible skill and trait that individuals have.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question in terms of our younger athletes, our kiddos in school. Kids with ADHD, we always hear exercise is good for them in terms of getting back into classroom and being able to do homework after school and that sort of thing. Is there a certain sport that you've seen that has helped kids with ADHD? Like, that maybe if we've got a parent, their kid has been diagnosed, is there a sport they should try, or is it whatever interests them? Is there any kind of connection there?
Yeah. I think there's kind of two things to consider. One, we know that like ADHD in particular, like that intense focus and concentration comes from passion. So whatever the sport is, the kid needs to be really interested in that sport. If it's like, oh, I was a soccer player when I was a kid, you should be one. Like if the kid doesn't like soccer, don't put them in soccer, right?
Yes.
Even if it is like, but they're hyperactive and it's a high energy sport. It really is important to find the sport that they really love. And maybe they're more into skateboarding or BMX or ice hockey, So I think one is really tapping into passion and the other thing really is about like kind of their needs and socially, how do they function best, right? So we've got one is like, what is my interest and my passion? And that could be soccer, that could be ping pong, that could be tennis, right? That could be BMX freestyle. We just don't know. And so I think allowing them the chance to explore all sports is really important. And then the other thing being kind of social style, right? Like if an athlete has a lot of high energy, but they struggle with social anxiety, they might not want to be on a soccer team. They might prefer to be in more of an individual sport like swimming or running or cycling or even tennis, right? Where like it's just me and my racket and I'm competing against somebody, but I don't have to socialize with them, So I think thinking through like, do they want more parallel play where I'm competing with people, but not necessarily interacting with a team? Is it, I need something more creative where I'm allowed to express myself more, right? So I might look more at those kind of alternative sports that are now Olympic sports. They're not that alternative anymore.
Breakdancing this year.
Breakdancing, yes. I think there's also kind of energy level. Like if I'm a high energy person, like what type of sport would that be? Is that something that's like a long, slow endurance sport, or is that more of a burst sport like gymnastics?
Yeah.
Because if you think about the gymnasts, they spend hours upon hours in the gym all day. But it's not constant, steady motion. It's bursts of energy, So I think it really comes down to personality and how they express their energy. And then also like some athletes need predictability, right? And so like if I need predictability, I probably don't want basketball or volleyball or football. I might prefer martial arts where we're all doing, again, parallel play, we're all doing the same thing, but it's very predictable. I know what to expect every time I show up. And we have these movements that are created for us, or dance, right? Where it's very predictable. And so I think it's kind of thinking through what type of structure do they need? What type of social interaction do they need? Do they need something that's more creative and expressive or more predictable? But then also energy level, what does this athlete really thrive in with regards to energy? And the cool thing is with youth sport, I think often we think that we have to like get our kid to specialize in a sport at a very young age. Mm-hmm. I have 2 kids and they've tried 10 sports. Yeah. Like, we just try them all.
Yeah, giving them the space to try it. And then if they say, I don't like this and I hate this, quitting is not always a bad thing.
No,
that's it.
Yes.
Even mid-season, I'm sorry, I know we're going to disappoint some people or whatever. I mean, there's that weird place between you made a commitment and then you also, this is detrimental to our mental health. Like, we hate this enough to give us this much anxiety. Right. So speak to that a little bit in terms of how much time do you give a kid to kind of decide,
Yeah. Well, I think, so there's actually a league here in town that has 6-week sessions. And that's what we've done a lot of, because you sign up. The first week, you don't know anybody. The second week, you kind of know who your team or your coach is. Third and fourth weeks, you're actually trying it out. And by 5th and 6th weeks, you kind of know what's going on. And so I really like the leagues that allow very short sessions where you really do get to try it out. It's minimal investment, right? Because I think sometimes that's a big barrier, is like, how much is it going to cost to sign my child up for this thing?
We're not going on vacation because we're doing baseball. Yeah.
So I think sports where they have smaller, like shorter sessions. Sports camps are also a great one where they do multiple sports within a camp itself so that they can try it that way. And the camp provides the equipment for the kids to use. But I really think it is, like you said, it's this flexibility of like, we'll try it out. And if we signed up for 12 weeks, but by 6 weeks, we're crying every time we go, like maybe we just have an honest conversation that this isn't what we agreed to, but we also need to be flexible with our expectations of ourselves. And it's okay to leave something that's not working for us. Yeah. What I do think happens a lot is we think like when we sign our kid up for a sport, like we're committing to this lifelong endeavor, and it doesn't need to be that. The research does show, and we know even like college athletes are recruited when they're multi-sport athletes. We want multi-sport athletes coming out of high school. And so even allowing a kid who says, maybe I really love martial arts and the predictability and the parallel play of that, but gosh, I do have a lot of fun at lacrosse too. Cool. Play them both.
Do both.
You don't have to specialize as a youth athlete.
Yeah.
I think that's so important these days, is realizing, one, we don't need our children to be professional athletes. Two, it's just about learning and curiosity and exploration and adventure right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And tell me, in terms of, okay, we've got a kid, this is the opposite problem, that's obsessed with the sport, can do nothing but the sport. How do we pull that kid away and say, but let's look at some other things you might be interested, so that we don't crash and burn if we go, okay, we're going to do baseball this whole time, and everybody's in on baseball, we're going to travel league and everything. We get to high school and we don't get this college scholarship. How do we get a kid so that we're not so obsessed that we have not, we look back and go, well, they didn't want to do anything else.
Right.
So now they literally have to find another interest at age 18, that kind of thing. How do you balance those kind of things as well?
So I work with a lot of them. And I agree that you cannot get to adulthood and have no balance. And so I think it is, we know you love baseball, and we know you want to travel, and we know that you love your team and you feel so connected and you are very successful, right? They'll spend hours at the batting cage. They'll spend hours with the pitcher, whatever their position is. But within that, you have to take time off. Yeah. There is a saying that there is no occupation without recreation. Mm-hmm. Like when we think about sport, there's no high level performance without balance and rest and recovery. Mm-hmm. And so it's even just this idea, like, to be the best you can be, you have to take time away from the sport. And so for that kid who is really driven and really obsessed with that baseball, let's say, maybe it's like, we do baseball 6 days a week, but on the 7th day, you don't do baseball. You do something different. And maybe it's, okay, let's go to the driving range. Let's try golf, because it's a similar hand-eye coordination type sport, but we have no expectations. We don't keep score. Or maybe we use that day to go hiking as a family, and start to cultivate this idea and this belief and this value that recovery and rest is just as important as hard work and drills and investment in the sport itself. And so, I see that in adolescent athletes, professional athletes who I work with, who they literally don't know what to do if they're not training. And we talk about it. Try a movie, try a video game, try going on vacation. Yeah. So it is a life skill that I think we all need to learn, of how do I find balance and build balance into my daily life. Mm-hmm. And it might be another sport that I just enjoy for recreation. It could be a totally different hobby. Maybe I start knitting or painting, or, maybe I start cooking or baking. I think it's this idea that I need balance to be the best I can be.
Okay, perfect. So let me ask you, in terms of Olympic athletes, so what are some of the issues that you see with Olympic athletes in terms of, maybe our ADHD athletes or, dyslexia athletes? I asked one of the ladies we interviewed, I said, did it freak you out to go to another country because you didn't know the language? That to me would have been like, okay, this is, but are there any kind of issues that you see, our ADHD medications? Does that affect you in the Olympic athletes? Are you allowed to take medication or you're not? I don't know if you know any of this or not. But
you have to get a TUE, which is a therapeutic use exemption.
Okay.
And so, like Adderall, one of the most common ADHD medications, is a banned substance by most sports.
Yeah.
The way it works is we have WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Association. Mm-hmm. They kind of oversee it all, and then each nation has their own national governing body, but it's by sport, right? So archery has their own banned substances, cycling has its own banned substances, soccer has its own banned substances, and some of it is because what's performance enhancing for archery does nothing for an athlete who's a cyclist, and vice versa. Something that helps a cyclist could be really horrible for an archer. So I think that you have to know your sport specifically. Adderall is a banned substance in cycling, I can say specifically, and an athlete would have to go get a TUE, which is a therapeutic use exemption, to be able to take the medication and not fail a drug test.
Got it. Okay.
And so there are situations where if it's clinically indicated, a doctor can sign a piece of paper that allows you to take your medication. Sure. But you just have to be really careful, because if your TUE expires and you get tested, you've just tested positive on a banned substance, and that can impact your career.
Yeah, I always wondered about that, because I always thought, when kids, I don't know about, adults as much, but I know when kids take Adderall and then they stop it, for summer break or whatever, it can really affect, obviously concentration and everything else, but all the other things, right? Mood and other things. So I always wondered, did athletes have to stop that before they left, or are they allowed to? So that answers that question.
Yeah. So in some medications athletes are on that they're not allowed to use, right? So then they have to learn to not use them. Like a different example, but that could be clinically indicated, like a male who struggles with low testosterone.
Yeah. Okay.
Like you can't get a TUE for that, even if you have a clinical problem, because it's performance enhancing, So I think there are some situations where the governing body says, yes, clinically indicated, you're allowed to use that. Other situations where no, even if you are clinically indicated to use this, we still see this as too much of a performance enhancing drug and no. Okay. And so like a male athlete who's recovering from anorexia, let's say, who has low T, would not be able to supplement in preparing for sports that are governed by an anti-doping association.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Yeah, but then it's funny because it's age group, right? So if you're old enough man, then you're okay. but if you're in your prime, then it's not okay.
Then it's not okay. Yeah.
So there's a lot of rules around it, and that's where it's important to work with somebody who really understands the anti-doping agencies and the rules so that they don't accidentally get you banned and making a prescription or putting you on a medication.
Yeah.
But kind of going to the bigger question, traveling internationally, I think that it can be really hard for anybody because different language, different food, different culture, right? There's a lot to navigate within that. Mm-hmm. However, if we kind of go back to what I was saying earlier, learning how to decode words, you've already got a system in place for how do I make sense of stuff that doesn't make sense to me, right? And so I do see that a lot of athletes who have come through learning disabilities, they do have this ability to navigate unfamiliar situations much more, I would say, eloquently than somebody who's maybe never faced adversity in their life, And it's really that idea that at a young age, you learn to manage adversity. And so facing adversity later on is familiar, whereas somebody who maybe has had it made of naturally they're just really good and they're smart and life has come easy. And then all of a sudden they're in a foreign country and they've never faced adversity, can be really overwhelming. So I do think that they have actually a bit of a leg up in that situation where they already know how to manage the adversity. Yeah. I think though one of the bigger challenges is sometimes that masking or that idea of I have to just present as though I've got it all figured out all of the time. That pressure I think weighs heavily, especially on elite and professional athletes of I know maybe that I have dyslexia or maybe that I have neurodiverse symptoms or traits in some way, and I have to hide those to appear neurotypical to the world. Sure. I think that comes as a heavy burden the further up you get within athletics, and I think we are slowly shifting where we're becoming more accepting of all people and allowing people to show up as they are. But I do think we still scrutinize if people show up different than what we expect of them.
Particularly people that we idolize, right? Yes. We need them to be the people we think they are, right? Because that works for us. But maybe isn't working for them so well, but that's what works for us, is they need to be perfect all the time and they have to win gold and you have to do this. And so that seems to me like that'd be a lot of pressure.
You have to be a great writer and a great speaker. And right after you've just delivered the performance of your lifetime, have an amazing interview in a foreign language.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay. Well, is there anything else you want to add about, high-level athletes or, the kind of ADHD or dyslexia? And is there anything that we didn't cover that you think I'd like to talk about this? And there doesn't have to be, but if you do.
I think I was just kind of in preparing for today, I was thinking through it, and I really think that I think it's that adversity piece, right? That ability to navigate adversity at a young age is such a powerful skill. And if we kind of think about even our specific to our culture, in the United States, so often we're trying to protect our children from adversity. And so they're not growing up facing hard situations. And kids with learning disabilities learn to navigate adversity at a young age, right? Whether it's ADHD or dyslexia or, a speech challenge, this idea that I have to learn to be different in the world and figure out how to cope and adapt to that, I think is very powerful. And it even speaks to emotional regulation, right? If I'm in a classroom and I can't read the text, I can't have an emotional outburst. And some of that is masking, I have to pretend it's all okay. Yeah. But some of that's also this idea that I'm learning to manage my emotions and I'm learning to navigate adversity and I'm learning to ask for help. And I think that those are really important life skills versus sometimes the message is figure it out on your own, do it all independently and be great at what you're doing. Yeah. versus like, I think learning disabilities really honor, like, be who you are and learn how to be the best at who you are and honor that part of you and that spirit of you. And I think that that's truly then like where these elite and Olympic athletes can be their best selves, because they've navigated adversity and they've learned to really respect and take care of themselves as a human being.
Yeah.
And I think that gives them a source of strength that the otherwise talented kind of easy road, you know, and I say that knowing getting to the Olympics is never easy.
Sure.
But like that idea that if I haven't faced a lot of adversity along the way and I haven't had to work through these challenges, it can be a lot harder later in life.
Yeah. Yeah. A little bit more resilient, just because it's like, this is something I've been through and I have a roadmap for how to deal with these hard things, you know, because I've been doing it for so long.
Right. And even just receiving feedback, you know, if you think about like kiddos who have to like, you have dyslexia and this is what this means for you and this is how we're going to work through it. Like, that's a hard pill to swallow.
Yes.
But if I can receive that feedback and realize it doesn't mean I'm a bad person, like that gives me a source of strength and self-worth and confidence that I wouldn't have had otherwise, you know? So if we even think about that idea of self-worth.
Yeah, I even think for the kids that didn't have great feedback, you know, that you're lazy and you're this and you're not applying yourself.
Being blamed.
Yeah. And I feel like even those kids can turn around and use sports to say, yeah, but look what I did here. And we're okay with it because, you know, it's like, you said this to me, but I did so good over here. But then even when you don't do so great in sports, you know, you got a little armor on you. You know, you can accept some negative feedback, still knowing you're good at what you're doing, you know.
Right. You develop that sense of self-efficacy. Yeah. And my only concern about that, right, is like, if I believe in myself because I'm good at sports and then it stops working for me. Like that's a very conditional self-confidence.
Yes, and that's bad. No, that part is really bad because that I feel like a lot of kids, particularly kids that get diagnosed later, use sports as their escape. Right. And then they become very good at that sport. And then like we were saying earlier, you get to 18 and you don't know what you're doing because you've used this as your outlet for so long. Right. So you need that combination of, I still need help in school, you know, but building the confidence in sports to help you have a little confidence in the classroom, I think is really big.
Competence.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank you again for sharing your thoughts with us today. And again, Dr. Kate Bennett with Athlete Insight, correct? Okay, wonderful. And if somebody wants a little bit more information about your practice or, you know, how to get their kiddo or high school, college athlete, where would they visit?
Yeah, so our website is www.athleteinsight.co, no com.
Okay.
And that has our contact information as well as a direct link to our scheduling system so that they can view it there.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you again for joining us today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.